War did not begin for Elias Corvin with an explosion or a scream, but with silence, the kind that pressed against the ears until a man could hear his own blood moving. The ruins of the border city lay frozen beneath a sky the color of old steel, smoke drifting low like a tired ghost that refused to leave. Elias had been trained to see enemies before faces, threats before humanity, and yet as he crouched behind the shattered remains of a concrete wall, his hands shaking slightly around his rifle, he knew something inside him had already begun to fracture. Across the broken street, through drifting ash and falling snow, stood a soldier from the other side, a woman in a torn uniform, her weapon lowered, her eyes wide not with hatred but disbelief. For a moment that felt longer than any battle he had survived, neither of them moved. They were strangers born under different flags, taught different histories, sworn to destroy each other without question. And yet in that suspended heartbeat, Elias saw not an enemy but a human being just as trapped by this war as he was. Her name, he would later learn, was Mira Vashenko. But in that moment she was only a pair of eyes reflecting the same terror he felt. The sound that broke the spell was the distant crack of a sniper rifle. Sharp and final. Elias did not think, he moved. Training vanished, instinct took over, and he lunged forward as the bullet tore through the air meant for her. Pain erupted in his chest like fire blooming beneath his skin, driving the breath from his lungs as he collapsed into the rubble. The world tilted violently, and all he could see was Mira's face as she ran toward him, screaming words he couldn't understand. Blood soaked his uniform, warm and unstoppable, while the war raged on around them as if nothing sacred had just been broken. Mira dragged him into cover with strength born of desperation, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. She had been taught that soldiers like him were monsters, that mercy was weakness, that hesitation meant death. And yet here he was, dying because he had chosen her life over his orders. As artillery thundered in the distance, she felt something dangerous take root in her chest, gratitude tangled with guilt, fear mixed with something far more terrifying, compassion. She should have left him. She should have taken his weapon and disappeared into the chaos. Instead, she stayed, tearing strips from her own uniform to bind his wound, whispering apologies into the smoke-filled air as if words alone could undo what had already happened. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, memories bleeding into the present. He remembered his mother's voice telling him that no war could erase kindness. Remembered the day he enlisted believing he could protect something good. Now, lying in the arms of the very person he was supposed to kill, those memories felt painfully ironic. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a question of whether he would survive long enough to understand why he had made that choice. When he opened his eyes again, Mira was still there, her face streaked with ash and tears she refused to let fall. Their eyes met once more, and in that fragile connection, something unspoken passed between them, a promise that this moment, however brief, would not be meaningless. Night fell slowly, blanketing the ruins in cold darkness as the fighting shifted elsewhere. Mira managed to get Elias to an abandoned underground shelter, dragging him through shadows and silence, guided only by instinct and stubborn hope. She knew harboring him was treason. If discovered, she would be executed without trial. But as she watched his chest rise and fall unevenly, she realized that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Saving him was no longer a choice. It was a commitment that bound her fate to his. Outside, the war continued to claim lives and rewrite borders, unaware that in a forgotten corner of destruction, two enemies had become something far more dangerous to the conflict than bullets or bombs, proof that humanity still survived. By the time dawn approached, Elias was still alive, though barely. Mira sat beside him, exhausted, afraid, and irrevocably changed. She did not know what would happen next, whether they would be found, whether he would wake, whether either of them would survive the coming days. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war had failed to turn her into what it demanded, and as pale light crept into the shelter, illuminating the blood on her hands and the stranger she had sworn to hate, she realized that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance was not pulling a trigger, but choosing to save the life of someone you were told to destroy. When Elias finally woke, the first thing he felt was pain, deep, burning, and absolute. followed by the unmistakable awareness that he should not be alive. His chest felt as though it had been split open and stitched together by fire, each breath scraping through him like broken glass. The second thing he noticed was the smell: damp concrete, rusted metal, smoke that had settled into the walls long ago, and something softer beneath it all: human warmth. He forced his eyes open slowly, expecting the harsh fluorescence of a military infirmary or the cold stare of an interrogator. Instead, he saw Mira. She was slumped against the wall a few feet away, head bowed, rifle resting uselessly across her lap, dark circles carved beneath her eyes by exhaustion. For a moment he wondered if he was hallucinating, if death had chosen a gentler face to welcome him. But when she shifted and looked up, their eyes locked, and the silence between them grew heavy with everything neither of them knew how to say. She froze, fingers tightening instinctively around the rifle. Not in threat, but habit, as if reminding herself who she was supposed to be. Elias tried to speak, to thank her or apologize or ask why he was still breathing, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. Mira was at his side in an instant, pressing a canteen to his lips, her movements quick yet careful, as though he might shatter if handled too roughly. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin, grounding him in the undeniable truth that this was real. "You shouldn't talk," she said softly, her accent thick, her voice tight with restraint. "The bullet missed your heart by less than a finger's width." "You were lucky," Elias almost laughed at that word. Lucky, he wondered what definition of luck included bleeding out in enemy arms beneath a collapsing city. Hours, or perhaps an entire day, passed in fragments. Mira cleaned his wound again, replaced the makeshift bandages, and rationed what little food she had. Every action was precise, practiced, the result of battlefield necessity rather than kindness, and yet Elias felt the care in every touch. Outside, distant gunfire echoed like a reminder that the world had not paused for them, that their fragile bubble of survival could burst at any moment. He learned quickly that she had not contacted her unit, that she had abandoned her assigned sector to save him. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily in his chest, heavier even than the pain. "You didn't have to," he finally managed, his voice barely audible. Mira met his gaze without flinching. "You didn't have to either," she replied. And in that exchange, something shifted, as if the war itself had taken a step back, uncertain how to proceed. As Elias regained strength, reality crept in with cruel insistence. They were trapped, an enemy soldier and a deserter inside, a city being slowly erased. If Mira returned to her people, she would be executed for treason. If Elias was discovered, he would be interrogated or killed without hesitation. Survival now depended not on sides or uniforms, but on trust between two people who had every reason not to trust each other. At night, when the shelling grew closer and sleep came only in brief, uneasy stretches, they talked in whispers, not about tactics or allegiance, but about childhood memories, about places they missed, about who they had been before the war taught them to hate. Elias spoke of wide fields and quiet mornings, of a life he feared he would never see again. Mira spoke of music her mother used to play, of a river that froze solid every winter, of dreams that felt foolish now. Each word stitched them closer together, thread by fragile thread. The moment of truth came when footsteps echoed above the shelter, voices shouting orders in a language Mira knew all too well. Her unit was sweeping the area. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. She grabbed her rifle, eyes darting between the stairs and Elias, calculations racing through her mind. If she surrendered him, she might save herself. If she fought, they would both die. Elias saw the conflict written across her face and felt an unexpected calm settle over him. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Do what you need to do." Mira stared at him, disbelief flashing into anger. "No," she whispered fiercely. "I already chose." And before he could argue, she hauled him to his feet, supporting his weight as they slipped. Through a back corridor moments before, soldiers flooded the shelter. They moved through the city like ghosts, avoiding patrols, sharing cover, relying on each other in ways neither had ever relied on an enemy before. More than once, Mira fired her weapon not at Elias, but for him, creating distractions, clearing paths, risking everything with each pull of the trigger. And when Elias stumbled, when his strength failed, she did not hesitate. She caught him every time. By the time they reached the outskirts, exhaustion had stripped them down to their core selves. There was no room left for ideology, only the raw truth of what they had become to each other. When they finally collapsed in an abandoned farmhouse beyond the city, the war felt distant, unreal, like a nightmare fading with daylight. Dawn broke softly, painting the sky in colors neither had seen in weeks. They sat together in silence, knowing that the hardest choices still lay ahead. They could part ways, vanish into separate futures shaped by lies and loss. Or they could do something far more dangerous, stay together, and face the world as traitors to the war but loyal to each other. Elias reached for Mira's hand, hesitant, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, grounding them both. In that quiet moment, they understood that the bullet he had taken had not only changed the course of her life, it had ended the war between them forever. And somewhere beyond the fields and ruined cities, beyond flags and borders, a new story waited to be written, one born not from hatred, but from sacrifice, courage, and a love that dared to exist where it was never meant to survive. The farmhouse became their refuge and their reckoning. It stood crooked at the edge of a forgotten field, its roof sagging under years of neglect, its walls scarred by old shrapnel and newer fear. Inside, dust motes floated in thin shafts of morning light, and the air carried the scent of dry wood and something almost peaceful. Elias slept fitfully on a pile of old blankets while Mira stood watch by a cracked window, rifle balanced against her shoulder, listening to the distant thud of artillery like a storm that refused to move on. Every sound made her tense. Every shadow felt like a threat. Yet when she looked back at Elias, alive, breathing, stubbornly refusing to die, she felt a strange, dangerous calm. The war had taken so much from her already. She would not let it take this too. By noon, Elias was awake and insisting on standing, his pride warring with the reality of his weakened body. He helped her reinforce the farmhouse with what little they could find, moving slowly, wincing with every step, but determined. They worked in silence, the kind that no longer felt awkward. It was a silence built from shared survival, from the understanding that words were sometimes unnecessary. When he finally sat, exhausted, Mira handed him a piece of stale bread, watching closely as he ate. "You shouldn't push yourself," she said. "If you open the wound again—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I can't be dead weight." She met his gaze, something soft flickering there. "You're not," she replied. And for the first time since the war began, Elias believed it. The truth, however, was unavoidable. Supplies were running low. Patrols would reach the countryside soon. Staying hidden indefinitely was impossible. As the sun dipped lower, they talked, not in whispers this time, but in quiet honesty. Mira admitted that her name would already be flagged, that her absence would be noticed. Elias confessed that even if he crossed back to his side, he would be interrogated, possibly imprisoned, for surviving under such impossible circumstances. The future stretched before them like a broken road, every direction dangerous. Yet neither suggested leaving the other behind. That unspoken decision had already been made in the ruins of the city, sealed by blood and choice. That night, the war found them again. The sound of engines cut through the darkness, low and deliberate. Mira stiffened, extinguishing the lantern as headlights swept across the field like searching eyes. Voices followed, orders barked sharply, boots crunching against gravel. A joint patrol, hunting deserters and survivors alike. Elias reached for his weapon, pain flaring as he moved. But Mira stopped him with a single look. "If they see you armed, they'll kill you instantly," she whispered. "Let me handle this." Fear surged in his chest, sharp and helpless. He had taken a bullet for her without thinking. Now he was being asked to trust her with his life again. The door burst open before they could move. Soldiers flooded the farmhouse, weapons raised, lights blinding. Mira stepped forward slowly, hands visible, her voice steady despite the chaos roaring in her head. She gave them her name, her rank, half a story carefully constructed to buy time. Elias watched from the shadows, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to intervene. One of the soldiers noticed the blood-stained bandages, suspicion narrowing his eyes. He raised his rifle toward the back room. Time slowed to a crawl. Elias moved without thinking, stepping into the light despite Mira's sharp warning. "Don't," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "It was me. I was wounded. She saved my life." The air froze. Guns shifted. Fingers tightened on triggers. Mira turned toward him, shock and fury warring with something dangerously close to pride. She had tried to protect him, and now he was doing the same, standing unarmed before soldiers, who saw him as nothing more than an enemy symbol. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the patrol leader laughed softly, cold and humorless. "How touching," he said. "An enemy willing to die for a traitor." He raised his weapon. Mira didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of Elias, body shielding his, eyes blazing with defiance. "If you shoot him," she said, "you'll have to shoot me first." What followed was chaos, shouting, confusion. A scuffle as one soldier hesitated. Another questioned the order. In that split second of uncertainty, an explosion rocked the field, distant but close enough to send everyone scrambling. Training took over. The patrol rushed outside, assuming an ambush. Mira grabbed Elias's hand and ran, pain and fear and adrenaline driving them forward into the dark. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and the farmhouse was nothing but a silhouette behind them. When they finally collapsed beneath a stand of trees, laughter broke from Mira's throat, half hysterical, half relieved. Elias joined in, the sound rough and wet with emotion. They were alive. Against all reason, they were still alive. As dawn crept over the horizon once more, they lay side by side, staring at a sky slowly reclaiming its color. There was no pretending now, no illusion that this was temporary. They had chosen each other in every way that mattered. Elias turned to Mira, his voice quiet but unshakable. "Wherever you go," he said, "I'm with you." She didn't answer immediately. She studied his face, memorizing it, as if afraid the world might try to erase it. Then she nodded. "Then we go somewhere the war can't follow," she said. It sounded impossible. It sounded like hope. They rose together, hands linked, stepping into an uncertain future shaped not by orders or borders, but by choice. Behind them, the war continued its endless hunger. Ahead of them lay danger, exile, and the fragile promise of something worth fighting for. And as they disappeared into the trees, the truth became clear. The bullet that should have ended one life had instead begun two new ones, bound together by courage, sacrifice, and a love born in the very heart of destruction.